of the session is Mr. Robert Finger. Robert is Professor of Agricultural Economics and Policy at the ETH Zurich, Switzerland. His research is at the interface of agricultural sciences and economics. A special focus is on the economics and policy of pesticides, the transitions towards low and no pesticide production systems, and sustainable pest management. Today, he will present his paper entitled Economics and Policy of Pesticide-free Agriculture. Please give a warm welcome to Robert Finger.
Yes, thank you very much for that introduction, but also for the invitation to be here. It's an honor. I know I'm the speaker number 9 without a break, but I'm the last one before the break, so stay tuned, stay with me. I'm going to present work that is always based on collaboration, but I want to highlight 2 people contributing to that work, especially Niklas Möhring from CNRS in France is also here, and Viviana Garcia, who is a PhD student in my group. I would like to deliver 3 key messages. First, pesticide risks need to be reduced, and pesticide-free production system or partial pesticide-free production systems are a good way to achieve that. Second, the responsibility for that step is not with the farmer alone, but it needs policy, it needs industry. And third, Switzerland is not only a nice country to travel, by the way, not so far away from here, but there are also very, very interesting and relevant case studies in Switzerland because some pesticide-free production systems are there, are on the field, are on the market. But let me start with the point that was already touched in an earlier presentation. To have the framing, plant protection is crucial, and the advances that we had in plant protection, including the chemical plant protection, is one of the key elements why we have the opportunity to sit here and not be on the field and farm and fight for our food. So this is an important element to keep in mind. Plant protection is crucial, but of course, plant protection not necessarily means pesticides. We are also well aware that especially the use of pesticides has negative effects on human health and in the environment, and this is very well documented around the globe. And especially looking at that study led by Fiona Tang that was published in Nature Geoscience, you see the reddish area is a kind of like indicating the risk of pesticide pollution, and Europe is a pesticide hotspot. And for that reason, there are many policies in place, right? We have heard Ecophyto, we have heard about the Farm to Fork plan, 50% reduction of pesticide use by 2030. So there are good reasons for these plans, right? But in Switzerland, to make that link, which is not in the European Union, there was even a more pronounced societal and political debate about pesticides. Because last year there was a vote whether to ban all synthetic pesticides from Switzerland within 10 years, ban all synthetic pesticides from agriculture, ban the import of all products that were produced with synthetic pesticides, and ban synthetic pesticides also in all other sectors. Yeah, and this is a normal process in Switzerland. This is a popular initiative that was up to vote. There was a second popular initiative actually proposing an in-between way that farmers only get direct payments if they don't use pesticides. Both of these popular initiatives were rejected, but you see it, 40% of the people voted in favor of that. And especially these initiatives were rejected because there was a compromise on the table. A compromise is a good way then to move forward. By the way, this is a paper in Nature Plants where I summarized that situation and also the process. And an important outcome of the compromise was that actually the goal now in Switzerland is to reduce the risk of pesticide use by 50% until 2027. So if Christian said 2030 is tomorrow morning, then we are speaking about this afternoon here. So there is an ambitious goal, and this is good and this is needed. There is a societal pressure on that. And the question is now how to come there. And 2 years ago, we had a paper led by Niklas where we tried to sketch what are the pathways for advancing pesticide policies. And the key message is clear: we need to involve all actors, right? The focus on the farmer and trying to move the farmer to do something or not do something is one important element, but it's not alone sufficient. So we need also to focus on the kind of like the upstream actors that, for example, breed new varieties, but also provide new technologies. We also need to take care of the downstream actors, the food industry, because if the food industry is not accepting a new standard, a new way of production, it's useless if it's introduced in the market. Nobody will buy it, and that also implies that we have to have a careful eye on the consumer. So this is the framework in that we operate, and we want to show how to combine these things. I'm now making the link to pesticide-free production and just come back to Florent's presentation. Pesticide-free production systems or partial pesticide-free production systems can be a viable opportunity in that framework. And now, in my group, we basically move from these big pictures to the stuff where you make your hands dirty. And not take pesticide-free production as an academic exercise only, but ask like, how do you bring it in the field? How do you bring it in the shelf? How is this actually functioning? And this is one of the case studies that we have been involved in the development, but now also in the tracing the process, researching the process, providing insight. It's on pesticide-free wheat production. So you see here the title of that paper that was published earlier this year in Food Policy, Pesticide-free but not organic. And this is, at least for Swiss standards, then a large-scale a new production standard that is introduced. And we studied that before it was introduced, before it was even piloted, so we made an ex-ante analysis of that system, whether this is viable at all, combined with different actors, and this is interesting, together with a farmer association and together with an industry player and together with applied science universities that made field trials along these lines. This was then the basis for a bigger project and program. The point here is no pesticides does not mean no pest management. So there's a combination of approaches used to produce wheat and only wheat in the crop rotation, pesticide-free. And this is a combination. I just highlight a couple of things that were already mentioned. Of course, you need to adjust your crop rotations. There is no wheat after wheat, for example. You need varieties that are resistant to fungi infestation, that are available to Swiss farmers. And of course, instead of using herbicides, you need to have some kind of weed control. Often it's mechanical weed control. But it's not organic, because this system still implies you can use artificial fertilizer. This has a big impact then also on the yield loss that you have compared to the conventional system. And it's not organic because the rest of the crop rotation is maybe low pesticide, maybe other crops are also no pesticide, but it's not necessarily pesticide free. If you look at that system, it of course depends where you are and what is the basis for comparison, but it's very clear you have lower yields than in conventional systems. It's maybe 20%, in other situations it might be more or less. Farmers also have additional costs because switching to, for example, mechanical weed control must be more expensive than herbicides, because otherwise they wouldn't have used herbicides in the first place. It also means that you have opportunity cost. If you have to adjust your crop rotation, you cannot do specific things that might be profitable. And there are higher risk for yield failure or yield losses. But on average, these production systems are economically viable on average because there is compensation for the farmers to make that step. And this, well, we are talking about something that is implemented already since 2 years. So farmers get additional direct payments for not using pesticides, and they get a price markup. So there's an industry downstream paying a higher price for the farmers, and ultimately then we as consumers pay a higher price, which is only a small share. I mean, the wheat price is not the major determinant of our bread price. And based on all that setup that was there, the biggest retailer in Switzerland, Migros, decided to sell only bread in the future, or bread and bakery products that are made out of cereals not produced with pesticides. So either it's organic or it's pesticide-free and not organic. Whether this is 2023, I have some doubts, but make it 2025. It's still very ambitious, huh? So, but this is the pledge. That means if this is going to succeed, then about, let's say, 20-25% of the Swiss wheat production has to be under that production scheme. So there is a need to scale that up. And this is also our research where we basically trace the process I said that, and part of that is we made a survey about 2 years ago and asking about the participation decision. You see here from the more than 1,000 producers that we surveyed, 14% were in the very first year where this was possible adopting that program because it's economically viable, and even more important, a large share actually was indicating that they intend to adopt it. And then we looked, so we are interested in why farmers are doing this step and especially why they are not doing that step, because this can guide us how to actually guide industry and policy, how to support farmers making that step. So we look at what determines the adoption. There are no structural characteristics that matter here, but what is very important is if farmers perceive risk as being high, switching to pesticide-free, and you see it here, there is a risk of lower yield quality, risk of a yield decrease, also a risk of making an investment, for example, in mechanical weed control that doesn't pay off. So there are a lot of risks that we surveyed the farmers, and in that graph there, you see 3 lines. And the line to the very left are actually the early adopters. They perceive all these risks systematically as substantially lower. Then the line to the very right, these are the people that say, I would never adopt that program. So people who perceive the risk as very high do not adopt that program and don't even think about adopting it. We also see, of course, that if farmers perceiving the yield losses, because this is a new unknown production system, perceive the yield loss as high, they don't adopt. And of course, they are very much in favor of compensation, if you ask them. Maybe less intuitive is, but a very strong predictor is whether farmers think it makes sense to not use pesticides in terms of human health impact and environmental impact. If they believe that if they don't use herbicides, if they don't use pesticides, if this is really good for the environment, if they are convinced about that, they are much more likely to go in that program. So there is a lot of non-monetary incentive around. We of course also see that the interaction between colleagues is a very good predictor. So we have a series of papers on that case study. And we also see goal conflicts. For example, conservation tillage is not well functioning together with this system. So these are then conclusions that we were feeding back to the farmers association that we work with, and then basically what they do, they tailor their extension also along these lines with many other insights that they get from other places. But it's very clear, and this is a lesson learned, I guess, for all pesticide-free production, farmers need to be paid for pesticide-free practices. So if this doesn't pay off, they don't do it. There's also a high risk involved in making that step, or at least farmers perceive it as a high risk. And this needs to be reduced. Whether this is by communicating what the risk really is or providing them an insurance, there are different opportunities, but these risks play a major role. And you need very targeted information and extension to do that. Moreover, you need to go beyond the monetary incentives. So, for example, disclosing an information on the pesticide risk for environment and humans is a very good strategy to provide evidence that triggers action. You can exploit networks, because we see farmer-farmer interaction. If they start talking, if they have peers, if they have neighbors that do make that step, they are much more likely to be open for that. We need to exploit that actively. And we also really, as a researcher, we need to address the trade-offs. Again, I'm highlighting conservation agriculture as a key aspect here. So if you run the risk of losing all the benefits of conservation agriculture by going to pesticide-free, it's not a win-win, so to say, and we need to solve that because farmers are interested in both. And for us, also a next step is lessons learned. We also look at other crops. Niklas this afternoon is presenting also research on spelt, where this is also done, pesticide with a pesticide-free production. And then we also, with colleagues from Agroscope, look at the implications at the sector level if multiple crops are going pesticide-free. So to conclude, we need to reduce pesticide risk, and that needs a holistic perspective, and pesticide-free production is one element, also in the short run. For that, we need public policies, right? So economic instruments like subsidies, but then of course also extension services, as I highlighted. But we also need corporate policies. We need industry. If there is no industry backing the strategy up, it's very difficult to be successful. So if you can bring on board downstream industries in supporting that process from the beginning, from the design till the implementation, this is a key facilitator. Once a retailer says, I want to only sell this, this is much more influential than any policy pledge that you do somewhere. But I would like to also highlight it's very specific to the agriculture system we talk about. So I'm not talked about wheat and then a presentation about spelt, but the crops that you presented with potatoes and grapes, this is of course much more difficult to go pesticide-free, but also very low pesticide production systems will be characterized by very similar things from the perspective of the farmer. And given that Switzerland has a high societal and political pressure on that issue, it's also a very nice experimental playing field because there's a lot of money in the system for the agriculture policy. We hope that Switzerland then may also serve as a role model for some innovations in terms of pesticide reduction. And I stopped with an impression from a farm who's actually doing that production that I visited on Monday. So this is a pesticide-free wheat production field. It more looks like a flower collection. But the interesting fact with the farm visit was that I have been there with Mark Schneider, the CEO of Nestle. So actually he now also knows about pesticide-free production. Who knows whether Nestle is the next industry player to adopt it? I don't think so. But anyway, I'm looking forward also to be in touch with you on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Robert, and congratulations. I think you really managed to keep the attention of the audience all the way to the end of your presentation after 5 speakers. Very good job. Any questions for way up in the top, high up in the top on the right? I see some hands raised.
Thanks a lot for the very nice presentation. Do you think that a limited use of pesticides, chemical pesticides, could be part of the solution, or even should be part of the solution? Or do we necessarily need to get rid of all chemicals?
Yes, thank you very much for that very relevant question. So I'm personally convinced that, of course, using some pesticides as a matter of last resort is still a very important and good strategy. But I think this now is an example where you have the opportunity to gradually start in the crop rotation, removing some pesticides. And I foresee that this is then expanded, that you not have necessarily crop rotations that are entirely pesticide-free, but you have some crops that are pesticide-free, some with low pesticides, of a combination of all the measures that you have presented. So it's one step. And it's a step that is very interesting also from the industry side to flag that, because it's much easier to say this is pesticide-free than I reduce pesticide by maybe between 50 and 90%. So this is also a communication issue, which is not always, I mean, good, but it's also an opportunity. When you have the opportunity for some crops to do an action, it can be one of the first steps. But overall, I think your question also guides to the paper led by Florence, where there is actually a situation laid out how also a process can go on.
Okay, thank you for the question. I believe there was a second question up on the same row.
Yes, Valentin Bellassène, I'm an economist at INRAE. Could you give us some details about the control procedures for the claim pesticide-free? Is it based on the farmer's accounting books? Is it based on the measurement of pesticide residues in the crops? How is it done?
How they do the control, actually yeah. So to indicate the pesticide-free production, I said that is compensated also with direct payments. So there actually technically these are two direct payment schemes in Switzerland that are combined. One for not using everything but herbicides and one for not using herbicides. So that means actually the government is in charge of controlling that anyway. So you have a clear documentation of that. And then is the next question whether you anyway can control what farmers are doing. But so this is clearly recorded, documented, and then you have the normal, let's say, governmental monitoring process behind it. So that's not too difficult. What is difficult indeed, I guess, are the value chains. Huh? Because if you think about, you have to bring the cereals to a mill. And then you have production systems in Switzerland, conventional, organic, pesticide-free. Then you have a low pesticide scheme on the market. Then you have 4 different chains, and you need 4 different, trucks. You need 4 different mills, and this is making it very expensive in the end. This is something where indeed might be issues of mixing, but that's why I also think it's going to drop. I mean, the conventional option is probably dropped in a few years because it's not relevant anymore. So. In that sense, but I think the process overall is very easy to monitor, given the current situations. But it's maybe expensive.
Okay, thank you. There's a question in the middle, at the top. Whoever can bring
Thank
a
you
mic.
very much for presentation. You told that consumers accept to pay a higher price. But is a problem. I come from Eastern Europe. I come from Romania. We don't have the same salary like in Switzerland. So most of the consumers from my country didn't accept to pay extra for bread without pesticide. They want it, but already the price to food from classical agriculture is higher. So how is solution in the future for this problem? Because there are difference between Eastern Europe and Western Europe, and also in Eastern Europe, there are differences between the countries, and our income are lower in average.
Yeah, thank you very much. So indeed, I had on my last slide also that word of caution. You cannot transport that experience to everywhere else. But I believe 2 things are necessarily given in all cases. A, if the industry partner is not supporting that activity on the ground, it's very difficult. So imagine that the industry partner would be, skeptical about pesticide-free production because the quality might be reduced. Then you don't bring that to the market, and that means farmers are also not producing it. That is the first observation. Second is that, of course, you pay for the pesticides or you pay for the pesticides in different ways. You also pay as a taxpayer for pesticide use because there is obviously external cost. If you have biodiversity loss and you have human health affected, we pay for that as a taxpayer anyway. So in that sense, there is a good argument, so to say, of giving a compensation also for these schemes, which is here in that example done with direct payments and the higher price. But I do see your point on that. And then last but not least, it really also needs to be a good balance in that situation here. This is not necessarily a extraordinary higher price, so it's not 3 times the price, it's really like a small share. And I said, in that example, it's easy to not use pesticides, and the 20% higher price are not going to be decisive for the price of the bread in the end here. That's only few percent of the bread price. But I share your thoughts that this kind of system also needs to be embedded in a bigger picture and go step by step where it fits. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, and one last question. I believe someone has the microphone already. Yes?
Okay, thank you. Sophie Niklos, I'm a researcher at INRA, and I work on the food demand side and on consumer behavior. I was interested by the risk perception slide in your talk. I wonder, so you mentioned the necessity to have a coordinated communication towards farmers to engage them in changing their practices. So did you already study whom they trust, and or do you plan to study whom they trust to organize this communication?
Yes, thank you very much. Indeed, that's something that we envision to do, and we know from other cropping systems that where the information is coming from is very important for what farmers actually do. So, for example, we have a paper showing if farmers are exposed to to industry extension, they are much more likely to use pesticides. If they are exposed to public extension, they are much more likely to go for preventive strategies and use fewer pesticides. So there is clearly an importance of the channel and whom they trust, but indeed this is a very good point. We are intending to do that research. What I showed, the example, is that actually the producer organization itself started creating an website with information. I don't know how successful that now is, but they have videos in different languages and then also a lot of material. So, and I think that's really a good attempt to not only say here's an information and here, I don't know, Agroscope or Fiebel did a field trial and this is the result, but they actually make farmers speak. Yeah? That's the thing. So there is no researcher standing there. This is only farmers that are presenting their own experience backed up with evidence. So, and I think this is a crucial element. That this is not also, it's also not a top-down thing, but this is farmers that need to leverage that to other farmers.
Okay, thank you very much.